person who is joining us right now, this is Daniel Monroy. Let me wave Daniel. So, so Daniel is currently a senior software engineer at Microsoft. Full disclosure, Daniel joined Microsoft. When did you join, Daniel?
2015.
2015. So 2015, at the time I was working at Microsoft, I worked with Daniel in the Windows servicing and deployment teams. He and I worked on the apps servicing. So we service things like Notepad and Windows Journal was the big one.
No.
I don't know. Did you find your award?
Yep, I have it.
You?
Yeah.
So he and I both have these awards. There we go. So this is the award that we got when we removed Windows Journal from Windows. And I was joking because Windows Journal is now making a comeback. It's a new product, but the same name, kind of like the Surface started off as a big tabletop thing, and then it came out as a laptop. So, I worked with Daniel when you first joined in 2015 as college hire. I was a PM at the time in the servicing division. Daniel joined at that, and in the past 6-7 years, he's worked his way up from a college hire to a senior software engineer, working on a product called MakeCode. Can you describe what MakeCode is, Daniel?
Yeah, it's pretty much a visual drag and drop tool. We're trying to help kids K through 12 learn to code. Very much similar to other tools that you might know, Snap, Scratch, and whatnot.
Yeah. One of the cool things about MakeCode that I've seen, Snap and Scratch are really good. They're block programming languages if you ever use them. MakeCode is a lot like that, but one of the cool things is you can draw, you can write your code with blocks, and then you can click this little button up at the top to switch to either the Python code or the JavaScript code that's in the back end. So you can actually code all this in Python or JavaScript as well. And then flip back to blocks to see what it looks like in blocks. That's something that Snap and Scratch don't do, and I really appreciate that. And so I've been working with Daniel recently on curriculum for high school students using MakeCode. So we're coming up on kind of the last couple of weeks of writing that curriculum and editing it and putting it all together. And then we're going to do some train the trainer stuff this summer for it, hopefully to get it out to students in September. Mm-hmm. And so Daniel, you've been on that team for a little while. What do you do on that team?
Yeah, so that's the $1 million question, but yeah, so I've been here since July actually, so not that long, not as long as you might expect. So I guess kind of just walking you through my career at Microsoft. Yeah, like John said, I started as a developer at the Windows Servicing division. Mainly my focus was on Windows Media Player, which was real fun to work for. 3.5 years, and then I switched to the .NET division. So I worked with the project system, and that kind of exposed me to a lot of open source and how that stuff works. It was really interesting switching from a very consumer-based product where updates were delivered once a month type of thing, and we'd get bugs like, "Hey, my music's not playing," very vague, very whatnot, and then moving to this division. The developer division, which we're working with people that are writing code on a daily basis, and if something wasn't working, they were exposed to all our open source code, and they'd submit issues, and sometimes we'd even get PRs. So it was super nice going to a different change. But yeah, so I worked at the project system there for a little bit over 2 years, and then in July I joined the MakeCode team, mainly driven by a passion for education. I've always thought that education's a great path to be working at, and Microsoft exposed me to that and offered me that possibility to do that here. So yeah, so it's very interesting. But when you switch teams or join a different team within Microsoft, they're really trying to grow your career, right? It's not something specific that you're tasked to do. That's kind of what vendors are tasked to do, right? Like, we want them to do this one thing and perform, and that's it. That's all we want. Whereas when you're growing as an FTE, we want you to develop the different skills. We want you to know exactly what's going on. So it's a very interesting thing with my manager. He's been trying to expose me to different products that we have, to different parts of the product that we have as well. So like John said, we have this website called Microsoft or Make Code Arcade, which you create little games and whatnot, and we have a simulator on the website. But we also have a various set of other products. We also work with Microbit very closely, and that's a physical hardware device where you code lights and sounds and movements and all that stuff. So that's a whole different product that we also have. And then we also have, obviously, as a website, like a lot of the front end and a lot of the back end. And I hadn't really done any website development before joining this team as well. So I started working on a little bit of the front end, and then I switched to a little bit of the back end. And right now I'm working with some compliance stuff, some accessibility stuff. So it's been really all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah, there was one acronym that you used when you were describing that, and that was FTE. And for those of you who know,
full-time employee.
Yeah, full-time employee. So Microsoft employs people like Daniel and I. We were full-time employees. We were Microsoft. We worked for Microsoft. We were paid by Microsoft. We also had vendors, and these were contractors basically who would work for us and do specific tasks and such. And so the vendors worked for different companies. They were just under contract with Microsoft. So. Before you came to Microsoft, because I don't know a lot about this, where were you before you came to Microsoft?
Yeah, so I was, like I said, I was recruited directly from college to come to Microsoft. I'm originally from Guatemala, born and raised there. Did all my schooling there, high school, up until college, where I was kind of looking into coming to the US. And then I went to UT Austin. So I was in Texas for 4 years studying computer science and math. And then that's where I kind of got introduced to the idea of internships. And my junior year, so my last summer in college, Microsoft approached me. I went through the interview process, and I did an interview with the same team. So yeah, so that's kind of how my journey started at Microsoft.
Okay. So going through that interview process, now, did you have to go through a technical screening before you came on?
Yeah. Yeah. So how that worked was, well, I guess it was different because I was looking for an internship.
Right.
But I can tell you a little bit about that, and then how I conduct interviews, and then how interviews within Microsoft kind of work.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So for the internship, for the very first step that we did, it was kind of like a two-step journey. It was real quick. They kind of approached me. They had already seen my resume. They had already talked to me at a career fair. So I guess that's already part of the screening, right? And when they said like, hey, yeah, we want to kind of see what you're made of, they said, let's set up something here. And at the university, we're going to be talking to 50 different kids, and we're just going to do one technical question. It was something simple, like remove something from an array or something along those lines. But yeah, as a college kid, like where you're not really sure how that works, that might be an extremely tough question, right? So very, very tough, challenging technical question. Just one quick 30-minute interview. And what that did was decide if you were gonna be on site or not. If you moved past that, which I did, then we would get flown to Seattle to the Microsoft headquarters, where we do a full interview day. Basically, we'd meet with 4 or 5 different people, and these were all technical questions, 1 hour long technical questions, where you're in front of a whiteboard, writing these questions or writing these answers, talking with the interviewer and all that fun stuff. And then yeah, that's kind of how I went through the internship. And within Microsoft, like I said, I've moved teams, and usually when you want to move teams, they'll do some sort of interview as well. So either you'll talk with the hiring manager on the new team at first, and that's like the first screening, which kind of goes both ways. it's very interesting once you do have the job already. It's a very two-way interview where
Yeah,
it's like you want them, they want you.
yeah. They're not looking. Yeah, they're not looking to see if you're a good fit for Microsoft anymore. They know that now. They're looking to
Yeah,
see if you're a good fit for the team, and that's a little tougher
exactly.
sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, and then yeah, they might do a couple technical questions. You might meet with a couple of engineers, and I think it's really mostly just so uh, they can figure you out and see if you could work well with the rest of the engineers in the team.
So
Can I
when
ask
you're gonna, oh, go ahead, Ryan.
real quick, just to jump in? Can I? And I know it might be hard to remember those questions from many years ago when you were going in as an intern. But whether it be then or now, or questions you maybe kind of ask, could you be a little more specific into kind of the questions you've been asked and or the questions you ask candidates that you're hiring?
Yeah, it really depends on their level. So I think the best part is getting exposed to the resume, seeing how much experience they have, and then based on that you can ask appropriate questions. If they're just starting off, if it's their first job in a field like this, it's usually going to end up being something with data structures. So we really want to see your thought process. We don't really care if you know exactly all the functions that a dictionary has, or mastering the coding language. That's definitely a plus, and it's huge when you know that you can do set difference in Python, and that'll really help you out to find the difference between two arrays, as opposed to something very complex in C++ and managing memory and moving pointers. Like, that's great to know, but if you know something much better, then hey, that's awesome. So yeah, it'll be something along the lines of data structures. My go-to question really is with college hires, like, hey, what's give me the elements that are in the first array but are not in the second array. And then I want to start complicating things, right? Like, what happens if you have double numbers? And this also like comes down to the candidates asking me about the question itself, right? Like clarifying things about the question, like, are there duplicates? What do you want the duplicates to be? And then with that specific question that I just mentioned, I also tell them to just give them to me. And that's a very vague thing where I really want them to just print them out. A lot of kids end up storing them in another array or storing them somewhere else. And then I keep dragging, like, hey, how would you save memory? How would you save memory? How would you save memory? And it's really tough for them to be like, I have no idea. Like, everything's done in place. I'm doing everything. And I'm like, why are you giving me an array? I just wanted you to print these out, right? So very simple stuff like that, where you're already creating these constructs of like, this is what the person wants. Clarifying everything is always super, super good. But yeah, beyond that, yeah.
That's a really good point just to highlight. Something that I've always noticed as well is really good candidates are going to ask a lot of clarifying questions, because if you don't fully understand the problem, there's no way you can come up with a good optimized solution. So it's a really good quality, as you mentioned. And Nelson also asked, and it was, you've been at Microsoft for many years now. I'm not even sure if LeetCode existed back then, but he says, how much did you, and maybe we could extrapolate this out to other people or candidates or friends that you've helped prepare for the technical interview on things like LeetCode or solving those kind of programming challenges?
Yeah, so I'll be very honest. I'm the worst at interviewing. I really do bad. Like, I'm very bad at this stuff. And it's just because in real life you're never sorting stuff, right? Like, we just do dot sort, or if you want to sort something, you just figure it out. Go to Stack Overflow, and that's where the answer is at. So yeah, I'm really bad at data structures and interviews. I'm very good at talking my way through things and kind of resolving them, and that's another part of the interview, right? Like, we want to be able to discuss and give feedback and see how the candidate takes the feedback as well. So I'm really good at that, extracting hints from the interviewer. But yeah, I think LeetCode's one of the best tools there is. They're super helpful. but it does get to a point where it's counterproductive, right? Like there's such thing as doing too much of this. Because if you know the answer to all the questions that we're asking, like we don't really care about the answer at the end of the day. Like we know that these algorithms have been solved. It's something that you can do or you should be able to do. That's great. But we want you to walk us through your thought process. We want you to tell us what you're thinking or what made you think about that conclusion. How did you get to that? What's your thought process? Where are you getting stuck? When do you ask for questions? What type of questions are you asking? That's way more important than being like, oh yeah, this is the answer, and writing it down and not being able to communicate it.
Yeah, one of the toughest, actually, one interview that I did when I made my switch from customer support to being a test engineer. One of the interviewers that I was with, he asked me one question, and the entire hour was that one question, and it was exactly that. It was thought. It was, I had to give him, here are all the things I'm going to try. You know, he gave me a problem and said, you need to solve this problem. And so I said, okay, well, let's do this. He goes, nope, that's broken. And then let's try that. Nope, that doesn't work. And everything that I threw at him was just, it never worked. And he was just trying to get me to come up with as many ideas as I could and to think through the problem and to start asking things. And so, yeah, I can attest that 90% of a Microsoft interview is, we want to know what you're thinking, so that's actually good. So that's a great question, Nelson. Thank you for that. Jared had asked a question too, when you were talking about, working on back end versus front end and being able to work on both. Is that fairly typical of the teams there?
I think typical is a hard thing to define. But if you're looking for it, it exists, type of thing. Yeah, there's definitely going to be teams that are very specific on working on a certain tool set, and then there's going to be teams that do have all sorts of things. I think our team is a little bit different. We basically operate as a startup, so we wear a lot of hats. My title does say software engineer, but I don't know, 2 weeks ago I was doing some user research. I was sitting down with a 10-year-old and seeing how they use our site, asking them questions, getting feedback from that. We do a lot of data analysis. We work, like I said, with compliance stuff. We've been working a lot with content writers and user or UX designers, all that stuff. So
yeah, and you've got folks that are doing daily Twitch streams too, and pumping content out on YouTube. So
yeah,
I think that's, I don't think that would ever fly in WinSE or WSD. Twitch stream, let's see what's broken today.
Yeah.
I've got one quick follow-up question, kind of on that same topic. When you're thinking about junior developers, how much does SQL and the comfort with databases come into play, in your opinion, Daniel?
I mean, for me, not at all. Just because I don't work on anything that's related to that. But I'm sure if you go to some place like Microsoft Dynamics, all the Power BI stuff, I'm sure there's a lot more data ingestion that goes in there. But yeah, I haven't touched SQL since college. So
interesting.
On the PM side, I needed to have some semblance of data. Right. When we were removing journal, I needed to go and harvest and do some deep data mining to make sure that we knew who was going to be impacted by the actions that we were taking. So I had to have that level of knowledge of it. But yeah, I don't think I used it at all really throughout the rest of my career, except to kind of support those business decisions. So
yeah.
Okay, what's your favorite and then your least favorite aspects of your job right now?
I think my favorite stuff, like I said, is getting to work on all these different aspects of the development. Like that question that was just asked, like it's really cool to be exposed to all these different things in one same place, and also being able to have time to grow and learn from them, right? When I joined this team, I had no idea about JavaScript or TypeScript, none of web stuff, like I said, I hadn't really developed much. So yeah, being given time to learn that stuff, take courses, ask questions, work with professionals in these fields, like it's super cool to be able to do that. And I think that's kind of related as well to the least to I think I like the least, right? Like you're gonna get exposed to things that you don't particularly like. Like I'm not a huge fan of the front end. Like it's not my favorite really. Like working with this stuff is not really fun, but I guess it's part of the job, and it's kind of good to know how it works. And you won't really know what you don't like unless you try it as well. So I think it's yeah.
Okay. So along those lines, then what's a typical day look like for you? And I know they probably change throughout the week.
Yeah, and I'm involved with a lot of different initiatives beyond my job as well. So I think it really like obviously depends, but right now I'm working with a lot of compliance stuff, like I mentioned. So typically just working on a lot of alerts that we're getting, and PM's kind of broken by default. So that's kind of what happens when packages are broken. But I can tell you, for example, like last week, we had a huge malware issues because one of the packages that we're using was doing some stuff to protest about the deals with Ukraine and Russia, and like there was some advertising going on over there, and we can't really start having that malware on our software. So dealing with that, making sure that package is removed, making sure everything's still working properly. Beyond that, so yeah, I don't think right now is the most exciting part of my job. That's not what I'm dealing with right now, but I think it's really interesting. I think it's something that has to be done. We do this every 6 months. We run a huge compliance thing, and yeah, I've been working on this for the past month. So it takes a lot of time, but it's stuff that has to be done, and we rotate that. Like I said, once every 6 months for one of the engineers, and we're 6 engineers on the team, so you don't really get to do it that often, but it's part of what we do. So
like DST used to be, and WSD, it's worn around all over the place. Yeah, I'm not sure that folks, I don't know how much people who are coming into the industry realize how much time is actually spent on things like accessibility, and compliance and security, and all of the different little check boxes that go into, you think about just writing the code. Well, there's also writing the code, making sure that that it's accessible to folks with various disabilities, that it complies with different corporate or state or federal or whatever laws that are in place. So there's a lot of that goes into it, and that's all part of the work that you're doing there.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to notice as well. Like it's not coding all day every day. Like that would be so much fun. But yeah, it's a lot of planning, and especially like on a company as big as Microsoft, you're gonna be sitting down on meetings and sketching out different things and talking with the different counterparts. Like there's a lot of moving pieces that come together, and yeah, it's a lot about sketching that out and talking it out. And yeah, you can go ahead and, depending on your skills, like if you're really good at writing the code, you can create a lot of prototypes and expose them. Or if you're really good at sketching, like you might as well just sketch them and present that way. So it really depends on your skills, but yeah, it's not all code, and yeah.
Cool. So let's go to a couple of other questions that we got here. Scott was asking, as a professional developer, what does the learning process look like when you're tasked with learning something new? And would it be different for you than it would be for, say, a junior developer, somebody coming in as an SWE 1 or 2?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think the learning process is really gonna be pretty much the same, right? Like you just go on a website and start figuring it out, or get a textbook and start writing it up. I think the different approach is that you're kind of expected to deliver faster. And I'll say that just comes with experience. It's not really like, yeah, hey, you're supposed to know this already, so you should know it way faster. It's a matter of like, where to tackle things and what things you need to learn first, and how to learn it and how to start applying it immediately. As opposed to like, I feel like a junior developer might want to read the textbook end to end and understand everything, because that's kind of what you're tasked with, especially like if you're coming from school, right? In school, you're giving an assignment and you're supposed to complete it, and then you get graded on completion, and hey, that's great. Whereas at work, you can pick and choose about different things, right? Like you can say, like, I understand this one concept really good, so I'm going to go ahead and execute it and figure out a bug that needs to be fixed with these tool sets that I already have. And then you're already delivering, as opposed to like, hey, there's this whole other section that I really have no idea about, but I'll figure that one as I go. So I think that's the biggest difference in approach.
Okay. MS Library is still there, right? You still have access to actual books from the library still. Dennis had asked, what would you recommend to get better at actually solving problems? Because that's 99% of what software development is. So is there a place that you go to just get better at actually solving problems?
I guess I come to work every day. That's really the thing. It's just about getting exposed. But yeah, I don't know if you're talking about like actual problems or just like interview type of problems. But if it does go back to interview stuff, I think it's a lot of practice. For me, I think the thing that helps the most really is meeting with someone else, doing these live practices and actually talking it through, even if it's your friend and they might not understand anything that you're saying. That's even better. Like, you're supposed to be able to explain it to someone that has no idea what you're talking about. So yeah, sit down with a friend, with a spouse, with whoever it is that you might have available, and express it to them. And yeah, we probably talked about this, but like the rubber ducky, like having that pair programming stuff, right? Always being able to explain it and talk it to yourself. I think that's really good. So yeah.
Okay. Nazmul, you've got your hand raised there. Did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Can
Go
I?
for it.
Okay, great. That I have been in the banking industry for the last 16 years, and now recently I finished my master's in data science. And I was so excited to see how deep learning and machine learning is working. So now I got admission in Germany for Applied University for MSc in AI, artificial intelligence. So just want to understand that how do we approach as a newcomer or newborn baby in the field of data science for the job or applying somewhere? What is your take?
Once you graduate from college, you mean like once you have a degree, or?
No, I already have a master degree in data science, and now I'm doing MSc in artificial intelligence because I was so much excited. Maybe I go towards robotic, but I already finished my master's and I have a hands-on experience on Python, and in Python, I know the SQL and all the stuff, NumPy, Pandas, and I have the experience for, deep learning stuff like, LSTM, all these convolutions and all. So how do I start? Where do I apply? What do you suggest?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting, great position to be at. And it's I'm sure a lot of people have that same struggle, right? Like, it's like, all right, well, I done everything that's asked of me, and now what? Like, how do I get in there? It's going to be a lot of failures. I'm going to approach you with that. How I did it, well, like I said, I was still in college and going through career fairs, but I handed my resume to over 90 different companies. I think I was approached by 16 to do interviews, and then I was only given 3 offers, right? So narrowing it down for that, like, obviously I was shotgunning. I had no experience. I wasn't even done with my degree at that point. So it might not look exactly like that. but yeah, I think the networking, the connections are extremely valuable. So going to different conferences, meeting people, networking, socializing with them, and figuring out what they're doing, how they're doing it, is extremely valuable. And for that, LinkedIn, I think, is also one of the best tools that's out there. Just figuring out what people are posting, when people are posting things, what they're sharing, following people, stuff like that. I think that's really important. And yeah, I think just also knowing kind of what you want to do is very important. Like being able to narrow down to like, hey, this is like the one thing that I want to do. You obviously know you want to do stuff with AI, but right now I feel like that's such a broad term, right? Like what specifically do you want to do with it? Is there a company that's doing that right now? Is there someone that's working on that specific thing? And yeah, I would say like don't be afraid to reach out, honestly. You might get a response, you might not, but
No, thank you very much. Much
yeah.
appreciated.
Cool.
And I would just completely second what Daniel just said there. Right before you said that, Daniel, I was even thinking in my head that it would be good to mention that it's good to have a bit of an idea, Nazmul, about something you'd really like to be doing, right? Start, where do you start? Start where you'd like to start. You know, think about hobbies you might have or topics you're interested in or companies that excite you, and just start reaching out to them. Find them on LinkedIn, message them, look for. Oftentimes they won't be hiring for the exact role you're looking for, but due to the you know, job postings that they do have, you can understand the kinds of things they're looking for and the languages that they're using, et cetera. And you can kind of just start reaching out, and reaching out to 90 companies, getting responses from 16 and getting 3 offers is a very standard approach. Like
No,
when
it's
we're
quite
helping people.
inspiring, by the way. It's quite
Yeah.
inspiring, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people like you should expect to reach out to 100 companies, and so if you reach out to 1 or 2 a week, you should expect it to take a year, right? And it's also about following up. Once you've reached out to them, you shouldn't expect them to just be like, "Oh, I got an email from Nazmul," and immediately write you back. There, you should be plan to respond and to your own emails and follow up to your when you reach out 2 or 3 times. I would say at least to each of those companies that you're reaching out to.
Yeah. I would also
Thank
say I would also say go back to other companies after a while, even if you get rejected. I started at Microsoft in 1995. My first application to them was in 1992, right after I graduated college, and they basically ignored what I was saying. I wound up sending in a resume to work on the network stack for Windows NT 4.0, which was the new thing coming out. They were calling it Cairo. And they thought that I would because I had some experience at that point working with databases, they thought that I would be a really good person to be a support engineer for their new database product, Access 95. And so that got my foot in the door, and that led to everything else. But it took a couple of years before I finally, got in at Microsoft. And that was, at the time, the dream job for me. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So Daniel, you went to, you said you grew up in Guatemala, went to high school there, you came to UT Austin. What actually gave you the impetus to say, oh, computer science is the thing that I want to do, or computers are what I want to work with from now on?
Yeah, so I think as many a kid, video games were a huge influence, right? So yeah, I kind of liked video games at the time, and I was like, oh, this is cool, and computers are cool, and then there's this career that's called computer science, and it's got computer in its name. I had no idea what coding really was until I started seriously looking at college options, and then just being like, all right, computer science, and then looked up a couple YouTube videos. There was this YouTuber called The New Boston who I just started following, and they were teaching Java and how to code in Java, and I started doing a couple different things throughout my summer after I'd already been admitted, and I was like, all right, I'm going to college. And after taking that first class, doing that first assignment in the CS 101 class, like I was hooked. I was like, this is it. Like, this is just so cool to see stuff compiling and it works, and like I debugged stuff, and that feeling you get when you run that first program is just fascinating. That really got me hooked. And yeah, it also started completely deviating from video games once I understood what video games really were. I was like, yeah, never doing that, but cool.
I started the same way. I've obviously, I got a couple of years on you here. I started and I decided I really wanted to program video games, which is what got me into it. And then I discovered databases and compilers and stuff, and I thought, wow, these are really cool. And it's taken me until now, 30 years later, for me to decide maybe I'm ready to start writing video games now. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
So obviously you have your bachelor's degree. How important do you think a degree actually is, especially at Microsoft? How important is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you don't need a degree at all in any kind of education. Like, as long as you have great projects, great discipline. I think what the education really helped me out with was, like I was mentioning before, with the networking stuff. Obviously, I graduated with a class of 2,000 kids in CS, and now they're all over the world, honestly, in all different sectors of the industry. So that networking is invaluable. As far as stuff that was taught to me, I'm not really going to be working on computer architecture stuff or low level stuff. I'm not really going to be working on cryptography or databases or all these courses that I can mention that I took that were great at the time, and I think it's an awesome background to have, but I'm never really going to go into that stuff. So in a sense, they're useless. But I think the people that's work the best or have the best work ethic are people that have decided that, hey, this is kind of what I really want to do, and then they spend hours on end learning about different things. I can specifically mention right now, like with all the web development, like there's a developer on my team who's fantastic doing a lot of this stuff because he loves it, and he spends hours on end with discovering new frameworks and new technologies that we can use, and things that work, things that don't work. And he's just been doing that his whole life, right? Ever since he was in college. So he's always been super passionate about web development, and I don't think there's a better person for that than him. So it's all about passion, really. And I don't think you learned all that stuff in college or whatnot. So
I think it's telling too that you started off, saying that you were going up to YouTube and basically going to what I call going to YouTube University and picking up all this stuff and learning to do Java that way before you actually started with college and started doing all the stuff in college. I think I started the same way. I took a course in high school, but it wasn't during the courses in high school that I learned anything. It was after school in the computer lab with all the other folks, especially the upperclassmen who were a year or two ahead of me and who were showing me all this other really cool stuff that you could do. So yeah, and I'll agree with you. I don't think a degree is important. I mean, I've just like you. I mean, I've worked with people there who have PhDs, and I worked with people there who were just hired off the street. They were vendors. They started off just being testers. They had a penchant for it. They got hired on, and now they're developers, or they're developers and test, or now SWEs and whatever. So yeah, I don't think it's important either. I think you're right. It's the passion. But the other thing there is the projects. You mentioned having some projects behind you. So, assuming that some of our folks here, and a lot of our students are just starting off on this path, what are some good projects for them to look at that are going to make that kind of splash, that are going to make the impression on somebody like you who's hiring and you're looking for, okay, so what kind of stuff have you done? Because, obviously, they're not going to have a degree in computer science.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. Honestly, the project that you have, the backing that you have is fundamental. It really depends on what you want to do, right? When I was in college, I remember like creating a mobile app was the huge thing, right? Like if you had a mobile app, you would go to the career fair and show the recruiter with your phone, like, hey, here's what I've done, and that just wows anybody, right? Create the simplest mobile app, and there you go. Like that's it. It's a mobile thing that you can. It's a mobile resume, right? That's much better than a lot of words. So I think that's a huge thing, having projects like that you can show off, but also like doing contributions with open source, like having a great GitHub profile or whatever profile that you want to have, contributing to whichever open source project that you might be interested in. Don't just update the README files, don't just do grammar mistakes or whatnot, but actually doing big contributions to that, having a great grid. Obviously, GitHub has this visual side of having your calendar with all the commits that you've made. I think that's really cool, seeing someone that's very active on there. But yeah, if you have different projects, if you want to work on web development, creating a good website, a very optimized thing. Yeah, I think small projects like that, but also like even if it's just like a what you might call a class assignment, those also work sometimes. Like it's really just a matter of being able to show them off. But yeah.
Okay, that's good. So what kind of, so I guess what kind of tech and skills and I guess languages do you use? I mean, obviously MakeCode exposes at least Python and TypeScript, which is a form of JavaScript.
Yeah.
But kind of on the back end, what are you writing in? What are the languages and the technologies that you're using on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so that's where this team has become the most interesting team that I've worked on, because before it was working on Windows, I was using C++, and that was pretty much it. And then working on .NET, I was using C# and .NET and Visual Basic. It was very simple for me to answer those questions. Whereas now it's all like, all right, let's go with Node.js and React and all this crazy tech, right? That has a bunch of names and a bunch of different frameworks that we use that I'm still unfamiliar with. So that's like one of the hardest parts, where you're like, I've heard about this stuff and people are talking about it. Should I ask them what the heck we're talking about? Or like, where do I look real stupid and where do I don't? And for me, it's become a thing where I become humble and I'm just very open, and I'm like, hey, we're talking about npm here and I'm not really sure what we're doing. Like I don't know how this stuff works, but I'm going to take the day today and focus on that and learn a little bit about that. And if y'all have good pointers of how that works, please let me know, and I'll use those resources. But even working with the backend stuff, a lot of it, or all of it is on Azure, obviously. But going to the Azure portal for me was completely new. Azure is our biggest money revenue here at Microsoft, and in 7 years I had never used it. So for me, just going to that site and being like, all right, well, we've got thousands of engineers working on this stuff. All the professionals are sitting like half a block away from me. How do I even get to the site? Like, how do I navigate it? Stuff like that. I think that's a good thing to be able to be humbled by, and understand that it's all right not to understand everything. Not to be able to be like, all right, yeah, I know exactly everything that you're saying, and yeah, run this gulp command and then do this pxt thing. And then that's actually another very interesting thing, all these acronyms that are thrown at you, right? People are very, very good, especially at Microsoft, with what we call the 3-letter acronyms, the TLAs. Yeah. We just throw them out, and you're kind of expected to know what they mean. And sometimes it's funny, because I'm very much the person that'll ask, like, hey, you just said this one thing, what does that mean? And more often than not, people will be like, I don't know what it stands for. Like, I just say that word because that like, we know what we mean by it, but we don't know what it expands to. So stuff like that. But going back to your question, most of it in TypeScript, and Python not that much. It's mostly all on TypeScript, some JavaScript, and then some JSON stuff that I'm working with right now. the backend has a lot of C# and C++. Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of this stuff, and just to let you know, so Coding Nomads, we've got courses in Python, JavaScript. I believe Ryan, can you confirm? I thought we had something for React or Node with JavaScript.
We've got a React course. We essentially have a JavaScript suite, JavaScript 101, 201, and 301, and 301 is using React.
Okay.
And that's in development right now.
Right. And then for web development, I know we've got Django courses for Python developers, so doing Django stuff, which is interesting. And I know, so when I was at Microsoft, there was no Python. You didn't do Python. And then of course, Guido van Rossum now joins Microsoft, and now, over the years, obviously Microsoft has changed, embracing open source and embracing Linux, and now they've got Guido working there on Python, and MakeCode is now supporting Python and everything. So kind of a new wave of things that are happening there at Microsoft, which is it's always good to see. But as you're sitting there talking about being in meetings, people throwing around TLAs and just you not knowing what it is, you're making me homesick.
Yeah, no, it happens more often than not, and yeah, I think it's an interesting change that has occurred, and speaks to aspect of being able to adapt to things, right? You've been told not to do one thing your whole life or your whole career, and now you're being told to do a whole different one. For example, like I was just chatting with an old coworker in the .NET team, and he was saying like we can't even have private repos. Like we're not allowed to have anything private, even if it's the back. Like we have to figure out a way of doing stuff, like secret stuff that's not on a private repo. And yeah, it's kind of rough, but that's how the open source world should work, and we're kind of following the right policies there.
Yeah, that's good. We had a question up here from another Daniel wants to know if anybody is remote. Any of your coworkers are remote. I would think, other than outside of the current pandemic issues. And then as a new dev, how do you look for that kind of remote situation?
Yeah, that's a cool question. Before the pandemic, on the .NET team, on the project system team that I worked with 3 Australians. So in a team of 10, 3 of them were working remotely from their house in Australia. So not only did I expose the problem of, hey, how do we work with remote people, but how do we work with people that are 17 hours ahead of us, right? Those time differences were a huge thing. And yeah, it also comes down to a lot of understanding how daylight savings works on the US and then in Australia, and having that 3-hour overlap, 4-hour overlap, 5-hour overlap, maybe no overlap. That was super interesting. And I'd say it's really a matter of the manager doing a great work or a great initiative to promote everyone to. We use Teams, obviously. So with posting in Teams a lot and oversharing information there, those hallway conversations that happen tend to not occur with those people. So oversharing things that we discuss, or keeping them on a call for a little bit longer, stuff like that. That's always like a great thing. But over communicating with your team is a huge thing. Nowadays, I think that every single company has now become much better adapted to remote workers. I'm currently working with, I think one of our PMs is located in Oregon, and both of our UX designers are based off in the East Coast. So they're physically remote. The rest of the people are just remote because no one's coming to the office. Like right now I'm on a team room with 12, 15 chairs. I'm the only one here. That's why I'm taking like all here. So I was like, I don't want to pull out my laptop and go work somewhere else. But yeah, so I think it's become a very normalized thing. And I think that the second part of the question was like, how do you seek it out? I think a lot of the job postings right now would specify that. They've become really good at that. I do know that a lot of companies are not specifically looking for that though. Like they want people to start coming back, and they're kind of promoting for like, hey, let's physically get you here. But I would not be intimidated by that. I think it's one thing to have a job description and a job posting, and then having an actual job offer. Hey, once they want you, they want you anywhere. So I would go ahead and just start applying, and yeah, if you get the job offer and remote becomes a very prevalent thing for you, then let them know.
Yeah. Yeah, when you and I worked in WSD, we had an entire team in India, in Bangalore, India. And so it was 12 and a half hours or 11 and a half hours opposite us, depending upon daylight savings time. And as a PM, I was the one who interfaced with the PMs over there. So I either had a real early in the day call with them in order to figure out what their team was doing, or I had a really late night call with them to figure out what their team was doing and then pass it on. And there's a lot of email, and yeah, you're right. Over communicating is the key there, I think.
One quick, just to add in there, one quick nugget that I always used is you can apply for jobs that are technically based in locations where you physically aren't, right? So I lived in the West Coast, and I would oftentimes apply for jobs that were based on the East Coast, because if I got the job, it's inherently remote. And that worked on several occasions. It can be, it adds some difficulties, but in this realm of software development jobs, people are interested in hiring people kind of anywhere in the world if they know the right stuff and it works out. So it's not just about looking for jobs in this town or city that you live in. And if it's not where you live, then inherently you're remote.
Yeah, I'll definitely add the caveat that it again depends on exactly what you want to work on. If you're working on something that's more hardware related, then it becomes a little bit more of a trigger. And that's more specific towards like mixed reality and augmented reality, where, well, you kind of need the hardware, and it's a little bit harder to travel with that. But yeah.
And we had a couple of devs too who I remember. I don't know if you ever worked with Dan Matson or Rob Van Schooneveld. So these were two devs. One was in Texas, the other was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And they were really, for the longest time, they were the only two remote devs that I ever worked with, US-based remote devs on teams that I was a PM for. And they, basically we would have these 2 or 3 times a year. We'd fly them in, they'd stay for a week. That was part of their review, and then they'd go back. So it was about the only time I ever got to see these guys is when they came in. So it's definitely, it takes a little bit extra to do that. Peter Glenn was asking. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, John, I was just gonna because I know we're just about out of time, and so I wanted to get to Peter's question, and then I want to ask one kind of last parting question for you, Daniel, which is for people who are in the learning journey and trying to make this transition into a job in IT tech development. What would be your general advice? Right, and it can be really high level, or like if you're talking to a friend that's just getting started, or they've been at it a couple of months, but they're really into it, and you were trying to kind of give them some legitimate, friendly advice as to how they should look at this or what they should do. What would that be? So that would be my kind of parting question.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something very cliche to say, but don't give up. I think it's a very daunting experience where you're really failing a lot, and it happens where you spend whole days interviewing and you're super tired and you think you did great, and at the end of the day it's just not the right fit, and it doesn't work out. Like I said, it happened to me several times, and I mean the right way of seeing that, especially since you're going into a field like this, is pretty much like debugging, right? Like sometimes you're just debugging for days on days and nothing's really working. It doesn't compile. You have no idea what's going on, and then you just nuke everything and get clone the repo again, and dang, it compiles again. Like what you had made no changes, or it's one small semicolon that was missing, right? So yeah, don't give up. Ask for feedback is always good. especially with if your issue is going to be in interviews. Interviewers rarely give feedback. But if you know that, hey, something's not really working out and you want to start improving that, don't be afraid to ask for that feedback.
I want to get I'll
you.
comment on that in a minute, but I wanted to get to Peter's question. Peter was asking about Microsoft's current progress on mobile development versus Google or Apple, because they both have their own mobile platforms. So, and we used to have a mobile platform. So,
yeah. Good stuff. Yeah, we have Windows 11. That's a great operating system. And I don't think there's much of, as far as I know, I don't really mess with mobile stuff, so I wouldn't really know.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, the last couple of the last mobile platform that Microsoft had, just trying to break into that market is really tough, and we weren't able to do it the last time around. So I don't know if there's any, obviously, even if there was something that you knew that you couldn't. I don't think you can share it unless it's public anyway. So
yeah, I don't know about anything though. I work in open source, so everything I know.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that I would just comment when you were talking about asking for feedback, one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got actually was when you're asking for feedback, the one and only proper response, if somebody is giving you feedback, especially feedback that you asked for, the only proper response from you to that person is thank you. It's not, oh, but what about this, or I was trying that, or it's just thank you, because they're giving you feedback. They don't have to, like you said, interviewers don't have to give you feedback. If anybody's going to give you feedback, especially if you ask for it, thank them for the feedback. You can do with it whatever you want, but thank them for the feedback and make it part of, okay, because you want to continually get that feedback. You definitely don't want to be just kind of sitting there alone in a bubble without knowing what's going on. So. Okay, we're right at 1 o'clock. Actually, we're a little bit after 1 o'clock, my time, 1 o'clock. So I guess it's 11 o'clock on the West Coast and whatever o'clock, wherever y'all happen to be. I want to thank Daniel again. Daniel, thank you for taking an hour out of your day, coming to visit us in that crowded meeting room that you seem to find yourself in. I'd like to thank everybody else for coming. We'll have another one. We got off a week, so our schedule is kind of being shifted a week. So we're going to go 2 weeks out from today until the next Tech Talk, and we'll get those scheduled out as we go. If you have any other questions, feel free to post them up in the forum. We'll get this video done and posted just as soon as we possibly can. Ryan's living through a blizzard out there in California, so we're going to wait until the blizzard passes before we ask him to rely upon internet service getting through the snow. Other than that, Daniel, any parting words before we go? Thanks for having me here, and hope it was helpful to y'all. And like I said, don't be afraid to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. People are on LinkedIn, so if y'all want to connect, feel free to reach out.
Yep. Nice.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
We'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know by liking and subscribing. If there's another topic that you'd like to learn more about, leave us a comment. We would love to hear from you. And if you want to become a coding pro, visit our website at codingnomads.co. See you next time.